Thank you everybody for joining us today as part of Leeds Digital Festival. This is a BGSS webinar, Stop Designing, Start Creating, and how to turn great ideas into real change. We are recording today's session, so if anybody has missed the start or missed any of it, don't worry, we'll be sending it through after the session. We do want you to ask as many questions as possible, so do use the Q&A functionality. Without further ado, I will hand over to Dave, who's leading today's session.
Thank you, Karen. Hello, everybody. I hope you can see me. My name is Dave Black. So just to introduce myself really quickly, I work for Spark. So Spark is an innovation and design agency. We're based in London. I also have with me Rich McIntyre, who is one of our technical team. He works for BGSS. So Spark and BGSS are sister companies. BGSS is one of the world's biggest tech consultancies. So they're great at delivering and building products. And Spark is an innovation and design consultancy. This is our office set, so you can see we've got offices all over the world, all over from America to Lisbon, and we're going to be expanding soon as well. So what I'm here to talk about is just actually creating instead of just designing. And I hope we've got a kind of mix of designers and developers with us today, because I'm kind of going to talk about both sides. And the reason I've asked Rich in particular to come along is because we want to kind of get Q&A around how both sides work. And what this talk is really about is how we work together to produce great designs and produce great products. So the first thing I'd like to do is just to talk a little bit about design. And in particular, I'd really like to talk about what you would call bad design. So we're really surrounded by bad designs all day, every day. They're everywhere around us. In fact, we probably see a lot more bad design than we see good design. So we're surrounded by bad products. We're surrounded by things that don't work properly. We probably find this in our day-to-day lives, don't we? We find things that don't work properly, which are frustrating, things that get lost, or things that don't do their job properly. I find that every day, don't you? So here's an example, not cars, traffic jams. So traffic jams seem to be an inevitable fact of life, but actually traffic jams are a result of bad design decisions. So there's nothing inherent in the design of a car which causes traffic jams. It's to do with the fact that we all go to work at the same time and we all go to school at the same time. There's a civic design decision behind this, which is a bad design decision, which leads to traffic jams. Here's another one of my favorites, URLs in the internet. This is a really bad piece of design. URLs are the method by which human beings are supposed to access data on the internet, but they're not human readable. So they're really easy to forget. Passwords are the same thing. What are human beings really bad at remembering? Strings of letters and numbers. What are passwords made out of? Strings and letters and numbers. It's not a good piece of design. Banking, just about everything about banking is bad. Everything about banking is designed badly. Everything from loans to credit is designed badly, and we're surrounded by this every day. So they're big and they're small, right down to things like your car keys. Car keys are a terrible design. They're the only way to access one of the most important and valuable things that you own, yet they're one of the easiest things to lose. So we have a lot of bad design around us. There's a very famous designer called Paul Rand. He said, the public is more familiar with bad design than good design. So the public is in effect conditioned to prefer bad design because that's what we live with. So the new becomes threatening and the old becomes reassuring, even though it's actually bad. And I agree with that. So we become accepting of bad design. So instead of fighting bad design, we accept it. But the effects of bad design are pretty serious. It's not just frustration. Yes, we have things like losing our car keys. That's annoying. Losing your car keys is an irritation in the morning because you're usually under time pressure. But there are bigger effects too. We lose our passwords, and sometimes we lose access to very important data. Things like, but we have bigger effects too. So things like increased energy prices. So increased energy prices are a design decision. So they're a part of a service design which prioritizes things like profit over affordability. So affordability is not built into their design. So that's why we've got 2.4 million people in the UK who are living in fuel poverty. They have to choose between heating their house and feeding their children. Or how about the epidemic of identity issues that young people are facing in particular? So we've got 20% of young adults in the UK are experiencing depression, experiencing identity issues because there are bad design decisions around how we use things like social media. And things like climate change. I don't need to bang the drum on that one. We all know that climate change is a result of bad design decisions in things like industrial complexes and cars. So design's very powerful stuff. We need to accept that it's very powerful stuff. So a guy called David Carson, who was a famous designer, said that design will save the world right after rock and roll does. So he was kind of joking, but at the same time, we have to accept the power of design to mess things up is incalculable. And the cost of mopping up the spills from bad design and the consequences of bad design runs into billions every year. We're building workarounds for bad designs all the time. So maybe it's time to think about a solution to this problem. So instead of trying to fix all the bad designs, which is what we do at the moment, maybe we should try and fix the reason they're so bad, which is the process which is creating all this bad stuff. So the question is, how did so much design get so bad? So maybe the people designing, here's an option, maybe the people designing this stuff are all morons. Maybe we're all idiots. Well, that's people like me. So I'm going to say I don't think that's actually the case. I think most designers and most people who build stuff as well actually work really hard at their jobs. They're really excited about their jobs. They're passionate about their jobs. I don't believe that there's anything in this about laziness or about incompetence. I think there's something else happening, which I'll explain in a second. Maybe it's the client's fault. We hear this a lot from designers in particular. We hear it from the development side too. The client doesn't understand. The client ruled things out of scope. The client doesn't understand what's going on. They're not going to let us do what needs to be done. So maybe we can blame the client and say, well, it's the client's fault. But again, I don't think that clients are deliberately doing this. I think that clients generally want the best product and they genuinely want to meet their customer needs. But I think there's something else which is broken. Maybe technology is the problem. Maybe we lack the technology to solve these particular problems. Again, I don't think this is the case. This is 2020. We've got amazing things like smartphones. We've got incredible virtual reality and augmented reality and everything else. I don't think technology is at the root of this. So what do I think is going wrong? And this is just my opinion, but it underlies kind of what we're doing at BGSS and Spark. So we think about this a lot at BGSS and Spark, and we're interested in getting around this problem and making sure we deliver really good products. So what's a failed design and why is it not good? So let's define that first before we move on to talking about how things begin to get bad. So a good product should meet its user needs, which is to say it should do the thing it's supposed to do for the person it's supposed to do it for. A good product is economical. This is actually quite important. A good product is not too much product because too much product is too expensive or it does the wrong thing or too much of the wrong thing or too much of the right thing. It's economical. It does exactly what it's supposed to do and nothing more. And good products are prudent. So prudent means they're built with a view to the future. It means that the outside impact of what we do is considered in the design process. And more than anything else, I think it's very important that good products are real. So I think we can agree that designs which only exist on paper are not as good as designs which are real in delivering value. Okay, so that's my view of kind of what good design should look like. So therefore, failure to deliver becomes failure to design. So it doesn't really matter if you've designed something fantastic, if it never gets delivered, or it gets delivered wrong, or it gets delivered broken, or in parts, then you're not really designing properly. All the things that we looked at earlier, they all started as good ideas. There was nothing inherently bad in the ideas. There's nothing wrong with cars. There's nothing wrong with car keys. There's nothing wrong with the internet. They were really good designs, but somehow, somewhere along the line, something got missed. So how did they get spoiled? So here's a traditional method of building to digital products. I'm sure that some of you probably experienced this method. So what we have is, we have the design team on one side, and we have the development team on the other, and we've got a nice big wall built right in between them. Now, in some cases, the design team can actually be an external agency. It can actually be an outside company. They're not even in the same company as the development team. Even if they're in the same company, quite often you'll see that the design team has got a special studio somewhere in the building with a colored floor and beanbags, and the development team are living in a cubicle farm somewhere on the third floor. And this is a very common way to structure things. We build this wall in between the dev team and the design team. So what happens is the design team go away and they experience intense creativity and they think really hard and they come up with a brilliant idea for a fabulous product. And they design it. They design a wonderful service blueprint, they design wonderful visuals, maybe even a prototype, which works really well and seems to fit the user research needs that they've come up with, and they seem to have this great idea. And what they then do is they throw it over the wall and they throw it at the dev team. And what happens then is two things happen. The first thing is the design team says, thanks very much, bye-bye. Particularly if they're an external agency, you will find that they tend to leave at this point. So they've handed over their design and off they go. And they hand it over to the dev team who say, what the actual foosh is this? What they then say is, we haven't got the time, we haven't got the resources, and we haven't got the skills to build this. Now, again, this is not the dev team's fault because they weren't involved in the design process. It's not their fault that they're looking at this thing, which is probably a wonderful pie in the sky thing, and saying that, well, we've got BAU to do. We've got issues to fix. We've got our own sprint rhythm. What is this thing that you're throwing at us? So what happens then is the design gets butchered. So it gets cut up into little pieces. So little bits of the design gets delivered. I'm sure you've probably seen this. Have you seen this before? I've seen it happen lots of times where little bits of the design actually get delivered. I'll show you some examples. I worked for a major retail bank and we did some data analysis on people who'd been declined for personal loans. And we found that if the bank had used their actual spending behavior in their bank account instead of their credit score, 60% of those who were declined would have been approved. If you've ever been declined for credit, the most common reason is because of a mismatch of address details. So the credit reference agency's address details don't match the address details you supply. It's got nothing to do with whether or not you're a bad risk or not. But the bank didn't want to build the whole product because that bit, which had machine learning built into it, was too difficult. So they cut it out and they delivered a bunch of little other bits of it, which didn't really work properly. I worked for a major tech service provider recently. We did a big piece of customer research. We understood what their customers needed. We understood what their priorities were. And when we came to deliver this research and deliver the ideas about the design, they ruled all of the high priority items out of scope because they were too difficult for their design team, their dev team to produce. What they did was they took a whole bunch of little low priority items and added them up and believed that the little low priority items all added together equaled some of the high priority items. And what happened was the design got butchered, it got cut into pieces. This happens all over the place. New homes are 40% smaller than 40 years ago. Do you think the homeowners or home buyers are saying, well, what I really want is I want a smaller house. I actually want a living room that my sofa doesn't fit inside. And the reason this is happening is because the home designers are designing nice, big, airy, spacey houses. Then somebody else comes along and says, no, we can't do that because cost-benefit analysis or whatever it is. So the design gets cut into pieces and you only get little bits of it. So you get perhaps a built-in coffee machine in the kitchen, but you get a tiny living room. Last but not least, does anybody really believe this is the best that Apple can do? It's a slightly better version of what they did last year. What version are we up to? iPhone 12 now? I would defy anyone to even tell the difference between the phones. Apple have some of the best industrial designers in the world working for them. I don't believe for 1 second that this is the best they can do. I think that's what's happening is somewhere along the line, the design is not turning into delivery and it's being cut up into pieces. So next time you see a bad design, don't ask why the design is bad. Ask what got left out that could have made it good, because it probably did start its life as a really good design. So what's the answer? So obviously I'm talking big here and talking about, I'm being very critical of other designs, I understand that. But at BGSS and Spark, we have been thinking a lot about this problem. We've been finding ways around it. We've experimented a great deal with different ways of working with teams. I'm going to present a little bit about how we kind of get around this, and hopefully it'll spark a few questions in your mind. And you can ask, and Rich and I will kind of field those questions later. So the first principle is design from the start. And the second principle is delivery from the start. This seems incredibly straightforward, but actually there's a bit of finesse, there's a bit of secret sauce, which I'm going to show you. So what you need to do to make this happen is something we call Agile hacking. So Agile hacking actually means hacking the Agile process. I'm sure probably most of you work in Agile, don't you? We work in Agile all the time. It's not a fixed process. You know it's around flexibility. You know what it's for. But to make this process work, to make design into delivery work properly, you have to hack the process a little bit, and I'll show you how. So you probably know the traditional double diamond process. This is what you see from traditional design departments and design companies. They will do exactly this format. They will define the right problem. They'll do lots of research. They'll find out what the customer needs are. They define the problems, and then they define the right solution. They come up with great ideas about how it can be delivered. And their responsibility seems to end. So in a sense, what you might think you're heading for is this sort of presentation where you have finding the right problem, defining the right solution, and then actually building the right product or service. Now, to some extent, yes. This is in some senses what we're looking for. So we are looking for a team which can start at the beginning with nothing and finish at the end with a fully developed digital product. But there's a little bit more to it than that. So if we think about a sprint structure, the first way to do this, the way that we discussed before, is the design first model. So here's our sprint structure. So in sprint 0, we do a whole bunch of design. So the design team goes off and they work on a whole bunch of design activities. And what they do is they give that to the dev team in the next sprint. So the dev and the BAs try to pull features out of it, out of the designs, and try and create stories so that the development teams can actually go ahead and build this thing. What happens then is people start getting really angry because they weren't included in the design activity. That means it's actually quite difficult to pull features and stories out of the designs that have been created or out of these flat prototypes or whatever it is that's been handed over. And we do some development preparation, which is really difficult and involved. And then we try to refine the first feature that we've pulled out of the design. And what happens then is we get redesign activities. And this is a very common thing, to have to redesign part of what was there, or worse still, it starts getting butchered, because the dev team are looking at it and saying, yeah, it's really cool that you've designed this thing with this autocomplete and all this data in it, but unfortunately the platform doesn't allow it, or there's some background issue, or it's not within scope, or it's not within budget. So we end up with this terrible kind of thing where that's how we get within a few sprints towards the design being butchered. So not many people still work this way, hopefully. But a lot of people have kind of evolved into this next model. So this next model was what I kind of worked with for many years. Actually was prevalent in some of the businesses that I've worked in before we kind of got there. And it's called the feed the beast model. So what happens is we have two tracks. So we have a design team working alongside a development team and a delivery team. So what we have is we have design preparation at the start. So the design team goes away and they design a bunch of stuff. And they design feature number one. Then it goes over to the delivery teams to be refined. So stories and features are pulled out of it, and a bit of development preparation goes on. And what happens is that the design team then starts designing feature two while feature one is being developed. Then the design team design feature three while feature two is being refined and developed, and so on. And what you have is you end up with these two parallel tracks. Now this is risky, because although this might sometimes deliver workable features, what it actually also does is it puts the dev and the design teams against each other, because the design team exists to supply the delivery teams with features to develop. And the development teams and the delivery teams are completely dependent on those designers to keep up the velocity. So you tie the two velocities of the two tracks together, and it's dangerous because they may not work at the same speed. And as soon as one falters, the other one feels the knock-on effect. So it's better than the design first model, but it's still not ideal. So what we've moved on to with BGSS and Spark, and what we were experimenting with, is a dual channel model. So this is called dual channel Agile. It's a development of enterprise Agile, which BGSS came up with. It's a way of allowing designers and delivery teams to work together much more seamlessly. So what we have is we have the start. We now have design preparation and development preparation happening at the same time. And we then have design activity for feature one and development activity at the very start also happening side by side. And what we end up with is we end up with a solid track of design along the top. So we're not missing stages. We're not waiting for each other or waiting for knock-on velocity effects. So we're designing feature one, then refining feature one at the same time as we're designing feature two. Feature three is getting designed at the same time as we're refining feature two and developing feature one, and so on. And we end up with this kind of seamless double track where we're feeding each other properly because we're working together in a seamless way. And we end up with, as I say, this kind of constant velocity of design and development activity. Again, this seems kind of fairly rudimentary and straightforward, but there's a bit of a trick to this. So there is actually a secret sauce built into this thing. And it kind of starts at the very beginning. So it looks like it's straightforward, but there's actually something in here that I think needs explaining. So in this dual channel model, there's something really odd if you think about it, which is the design activity at the very beginning, the design prep and the dev prep and the delivery prep, and the design activity and the development activity, they're happening alongside each other, they're happening at the same time. Now that's a rather strange thing to do, because if you think about it, what is the delivery team actually developing if the design team hasn't come up with anything yet? It's a slightly odd thing to do, and I'll show you why. I'll show you how this works. So to be able to do this properly, you need to do agile hacking, which we discussed before. And what this really means is it's about hacking the team. It's about hacking the team structure. Now that needs something very important to happen. It really needs for people to look at other people in a very new way. So this is not the developer. I get a bit angry actually when I see people kind of thinking that this is what a developer looks like. Mostly because none of the developers and none of the engineers I know look like this, but mostly because, in case anyone doesn't know, this is Dennis Nedry from the film Jurassic Park. And he's this sort of caricature, he's a comic caricature of a programmer, what they call a programmer, right? And he's this kind of omnipotent guy, omniscient guy who's this amazing programmer. But nobody's like this. This is not what developers are really like. And we need to stop thinking of developers as kind of lovable but uncreative nerds. Also, this is not a designer. You may gather I don't look like this. So this is not a designer, this is a hipster. You get a lot of people do this. This is somebody who's cosplaying as a graphic designer. This is somebody who thinks that graphic designers look like this. So they have the mustache, they probably have some thick rimmed black glasses, and they probably have a trucker cap and some other stuff. That's not what makes you a designer. How you dress up doesn't make you a designer or an engineer. What we have to accept is, we have to accept firstly that our teams are full of really amazing people. So we've got all these different roles which are happening together. And the next thing we have to accept is that everybody is creative and should be included in creative work. So we shouldn't be cutting engineers and developers out of the creative part of the process. So that start process where we've got those activities happening at the same time, that's actually responsibility for everybody. So what we do is, we do what we call flexing combos. So what we do is we rethink the team structure and we hack it. So if we need rapid prototyping, what we do is we include, take a developer, front-end developer, take a UX designer, take a content designer. That's a rapid prototyping team. Now that team can build prototypes which have code standards built into them from the start. So you're not building some flat prototype in InVision or Marvel, you're actually developing code-based prototypes. Now, I know some designers will squeak a little bit about that, but let me share something interesting with you, which is in my experience working with front-end developers, they can build prototypes much faster than any designer can in InVision or Marvel, right? So they can build code-based prototypes which have got all of the code standards, they've got a common code base into them, and what they actually form is that prototype forms the start of the finished product. So you lose that disconnect between the flat design and the working product. Here's another combo. User researcher plus a user experience designer plus a tester. That's a fantastic accessibility team. So if you're doing GDS work in particular, this is a great team to flex. So have a couple of sprints, put these guys together and have them smash the accessibility requirements and build them into the code standards right at the bottom of the prototype, at the bottom of the product. Here's another one, here's a strategic one. Service designer, a delivery manager, and a technical architect. Now, I quite often do service design in my job. What this combination allows you to do is it allows you to produce a service design so you can design an entire company's processes right down to run books, but while having, building it on the technical architect's knowledge of the real technology and the real platform that you're going to have at your disposal to actually build this thing and actually run it. Because if you don't do that, what you're designing might be a nice thing, but it's not based on reality. And the technical architect's going to have to come along later and say, yeah, but we don't have this, we don't have any of the volume needed for that. That'll have to be a cloud thing, whatever it is. So going back to what I was saying, so this is what I was meaning about this kind of dual channel model. It looks like it's two channels, but it's actually just one channel. So the design preparation, the design work at the start actually involves the technical team. It's not actually two different tracks which are complementing each other. It's actually the same track. It's the same teams working together. And at each stage in that process, you can hack the right combos and flex the right combos to fit exactly what you need at that time. So I know some designers will squeak. They'll say it can't possibly work. It'll introduce constraints which will take away the freedom to design the product that I think needs to be designed. So in a sense, yes, it will, but at the same time, no, it won't. So those constraints that you're experiencing will exist during delivery anyway. You can't get away from them being constraints. If there are constraints around platform, around scope, around budget, they're just going to exist further down the line. What this process does is it brings those constraints closer to the front of the process. So instead of kind of ignoring them and leaving someone else to deal with them later, you're actually dealing with them and designing around the reality of the product and the reality of the environment you're dealing with right at the very, very beginning. So here's an example of this happening in a project. This is a project for Disclosure Scotland. So Disclosure Scotland is the background checking organisation in Scotland. So they're the ones who do the background checking if you want to work with vulnerable adults or with children. So here's the team. This is a retro. One of the things you'll notice is the team's really big. So that's because I think there were 45 of us working from BGSS on this particular project, but we didn't differentiate between, and what you're seeing in the picture are, there's some client personnel in there, there are some technical and development personnel, there are delivery managers, there are designers, they're all in the same retro. They don't have separate retros or separate sprint rhythms because our sprint rhythm was unified. So that's why they're all in the same retro. So this product was really important. What we were doing was we were moving this organization, Disclosure Scotland, away from a third-party platform which they'd invested in 15 years ago, which they could no longer afford. And we had to get them off this platform and on their own 2 feet and working as an organization in their own right. Now, that was really difficult, but it had to be done properly because of this. So you might know these 2 little girls. These 2 little girls were Jessica Wells and Holly Chapman, and they were murdered by their school janitor because there was no way to properly background check the school employees. So what we were designing with, that's one of your restrictions. There is no room to mess up this project. It has to be done really well. And it's real responsibility. So there is no room to say, well, I'm going to design something really well, but I don't have to worry about whether it gets delivered or not. You have to take responsibility and say, no, we have to deliver a really great product at the end of this. So what we had within this particular project was we had a lot of different things going on. So here's an example. We were building a service design for the whole organization for how the thing would work. We're building mailroom. We're doing manual entry of incoming paper application forms into digital systems. We're handling exceptions. We're also dealing with online applications. We're dealing with vetting and legal requirements. We're dealing with huge data requirements, and we're dealing with things like paper certificates being sent out. So we've got lots of teams working. We've got design teams, ops teams, UI teams, delivery teams, dev teams, engineering teams all over the place. It's really, really complex. It's a big thing. And what we did was flex again. So again, look at flexing these different things. So in this one, we've got an operating model team. So you can see this ops model, you've got an operating ops person, you've got a service designer, and you've got a data team. And what we did when we worked together with these, we realized that one of the big databases that we were working with, which was called the Police High database, which is a big database of police criminal information. It's very, very sensitive. It's a very difficult, dangerous thing to work with. We realized that this was going to have to be put in the cloud because we operated this flex model. It had never been done before. Nobody had ever put this kind of police data into the cloud, but we realized that it was going to have to be done. It was completely necessary for the design to be delivered properly. And so we did it, and it was an extraordinary piece of work. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. Once you get really good at it, you can start to flex combos which you might not expect. So this combo here, this is a client ambassador with a UX designer and a developer. So this client ambassador is actually one of the client's own personnel. They're a subject matter expert in some of the legal requirements for application forms for background checking. And we include them into the team along with a user experience designer who's working on the product prototypes. And then we have a developer as well, front-end developer. And what we're doing is we're building prototypes of application forms, which are built to an operating model and a legal requirements model supplied by the client ambassador. Okay, so is that lots of process? It's actually less process. So it allows you to stand up the right teams at the right time to find the right problems. But what it also does is it cuts out lots of steps which we don't tend to put in our roadmaps. But these steps exist. So the redesign step, we've already talked about that exists. Arguing the product owner, that happens quite a lot, that definitely exists. Come up against an impossible feature which can't be delivered, that exists too. And scope creep. So we don't put these into our roadmaps, but this method we're talking about, this dual channel agile project model, can cut out these steps. It's just that we don't happen to put them in the roadmap, so we don't understand that they're being cut out. So I'll tell you a little secret. Agile was never intended to be for optimization. It gets used a lot for optimization, but what it was actually meant to be for was experimentation. It's meant to be a flexible methodology which allows you to do exactly what we're talking about here. It's meant to be hacked. The kind of very rigid Agile model, which you see quite a lot of the time, is actually not what Agile was ever meant to be. It was meant to be experimented with. So maybe you want to try this. Maybe you want to try approaching this in a different way. So what do we need to do? The first thing you need to do is accept that culture matters. The culture of the company you're working with matters because they'll have to understand that you're going to experiment a little bit. You need to get everybody on board. So everybody who's affected, everybody who's in the Scrum teams and everybody who's in the sprint team needs to get on board with it. And the third thing is to go ahead and hack the teams. So if you do this, you might find a few things happening. So here are a few examples. Okay, one of the things you might find is that you actually get better user testing results from prototypes of real system than you do from mockups. Now, because I almost always work as a designer with prototypes which are built on the real code base, I find it very strange that you would do user testing with flat prototypes, which didn't really look or function like the real system. I don't think that's actually good data that you're getting back from that user testing. I think you're missing something very important. You might also find yourself seeing opportunities that perhaps the designers might have missed before. And again, I think I've seen lots of great ideas and lots of great opportunities coming from my delivery colleagues because they know things about the way the platform can work and they can suggest things which otherwise I would miss. The other thing is you might find that everyone gets a little bit happier. People do tend to be happier when they find that their expertise can be applied where they see the need. It empowers people. Instead of sitting, it allows people to stick their hand up and say, I think I can help with that. I think I can be on that flex combo over there. And the other thing is you might deliver exactly what was designed. And this is really important because so often as designers and developers and engineers, we end up delivering something which you know isn't really perfect. And it's just falls short in a few key areas and it's disappointing. But this method, because you're designing and developing right from the start together, it delivers exactly what you designed. So in conclusion, what's the point of all this? The point isn't to save the world. The point is just to save one part of your next project. I do want to challenge you. I'd like everybody to try this. I think this methodology is brilliant. I've been using it for quite a while now, but I think everyone should try one thing on their next project which they've never tried before. And it can be something really simple. Just try an unusual combo, try a new combo, try a little bit of team hacking or build something in a new way. So it doesn't have to be a really big thing. I'm not asking us to change the world. All the designs that we saw before that were bad, they didn't get that way. Even things like climate change didn't get that way because of one big problem. They got that way because of accumulation of lots of little problems. And the only way to get around them is to chip away with lots of little solutions. So it just has to make your project, your next project, a little bit better, and it's going to be yours. So thank you very much. I think that's me about time. So thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate your time. Rich and I are very happy to answer any questions you've got about the process, about how we work, about projects we've worked on, or about the people we work with. So thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Dave. So I think if anyone's got any questions, do send them in through the Q&A. There were a couple that came in, so I'll just... so to what extent do devs and designers need to learn each of the skills? So maybe that's one for both of you. You might have a slightly different answer. That'd be quite an interesting one.
I'll defer to Richard's expertise on this. Do you think designers should learn HTML and CSS, Rich?
It definitely helps. I don't think it's essential, but what is essential is that teamwork, and you were kind of alluding to that a little bit earlier. So it's not just the hard skills, it's the mindsets as well. So a designer certainly, I feel, needs to understand the mindset of a developer, and a developer needs to understand the mindset and appreciate those skills, not necessarily know them. If the more they do know them, the easier it is. So an example of this is a recent COVID project that we've been doing with Spark. And James, who was the designer, did happen to know HTML. And you talked about building that prototype together earlier. And what it meant was that teamwork of the prototype building was that little bit faster. It was that little bit more fluid. And that's where it really did help. But I think we could have also done it without. But it's about that collaboration together. And when you cannot appreciate each other's skills, it just speeds things up.
Yeah. I think there's a mistake that designers make in particular, and I see this on my side, which is to kind of misunderstand what engineers and devs actually do. there's this kind of idea that what they do is they have lines and lines of text in front of them, and they're constantly editing everything by hand, and it's incredibly it's like a different language, and you have to kind of learn it. That's only one very small part of what devs and engineers do. They do a huge amount of design work in their own right. They spend a lot of time preparing to make sure that the right thing is delivered, about doing technical architecture diagrams and figuring out how things fit together. I think there's much less difference these days, in particular, between what they're doing and what we're doing. I think there's less of a gap than we realize.
And I guess another one was, doesn't this approach need a lot of unicorns?
The myth of the unicorns, the mythical animals, so the designer who can also do JavaScript and can do React. Yes and no. They don't hurt. I wouldn't turn down having a unicorn on my team. It gives you a bit of, one thing it does give you, it gives you extra flex combos that you can do, because you basically have somebody who has multiple hats that they can wear. So they can turn into a front-end developer, they can turn into a UI guy, they can turn into a designer as you need them. So it gives you a few more flex combos that you can have at your disposal. They're not essential though, because it's in the nature of flexing combos that you can use whatever is to hand, and you can use whatever people you have around you.
And have you ever seen this process fail?
Rich, ever had a bad day? Seen this not work?
I think it's when over time, because it's easy to sort of say at the beginning of the project, oh, we want to work in this way. And just as there's scope creep, there's ways of working creep as well. And as soon as, and just little things like, for example, I've seen it where the designer has moved desks, and this turned into a huge breakdown into that ways of working that we had got so right, or sitting design teams together, that it kind of started with moving desks to the opposite side of the room, and then it went to engineers sitting together, designers sitting together, and that's when you've let it fail because you've not kept to that process. And I think this sort of great ideas and ways of working can sound really good at the beginning, but it's also something that you need a little bit of discipline in to keep that synced the whole way along a project.
Yeah, I would actually take that step further. I would actually say that in the occasions when I've seen this run into difficulties, it has been exactly because of that. It's been because of the way the teams are structured, but the most common reason is because we've been working with a client whose team structures just couldn't flex to accommodate that new way of working. So either they couldn't flex to accommodate the fact that they were changing combos and didn't have set roles, or they found that they were just not able to handle the degree of change that was required and the flexibility from their own team, because we were asking their team to come and join into different types of workshops which they weren't used to, or they were involving themselves in areas which they were kind of saying, hang on a second, I'm not really supposed to do this. I'm just a BA. I shouldn't really be doing this part of the process. And there became difficulties, and there actually became client friction, where the product owner on the client side was coming to us and saying, but why are you doing that? I don't understand why you're asking my BA to join a prototyping session. This doesn't make any sense. So I think that's the most common cause of friction.
I think, Dave, that really leads on nicely to one of the questions, like what does that conversation with the client look like to get them on board with experimentation, both with team combos and features, particularly for those clients that are less mature in both Agile and design practices?
Really good question. So the challenge, I think, with any client is you have to be very realistic about, and maturity is the right word to use. So you might have seen the Russian staircase approach to maturity mapping, which is where you look at where you are sitting on a staircase and versus where your client is. Now, if you're quite a mature organization, as BGSS and Spark are, you might be astronomically more mature in your design process and in your delivery process than your client is. And what you have to understand is more maturity means being able to see a wider strategic view. You're able to see bigger impacts. You'll be able to see the product end to end, for example. If the client is further down the ladder, they tend to only see things at the feature level. They tend to only play around with features. They tend to see things which are fragmented and smaller. Now, it doesn't mean you can't do the big strategic stuff. It means that it's the communication that's the issue. You've got to find a way to talk to your client in a way that they understand. Because if you talk to them about strategy, they're not able to see the whole strategy and they can't understand what you're saying. What do you, Rich? What do you think?
I think that's really good in as far as it's in a sense that it's already got going and you're trying to set expectations as you go. But I think it really helps if you can ideally get to this before the engagement happens, and that means that there's a bit of collaboration even with the pitching folks who are pitching for the work in the beginning. So I would go to a client with a great idea and you want to talk about outcomes. The client wants to hear about the outcomes that they're going to get at the end of a project. And so if you can talk about those scenarios whilst you're pitching that idea to them at the beginning and say, look, if we work together, we can achieve this. If we don't, you might limit the opportunities that you get in order to get the outcomes that you're hoping for.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's about right.
We've just got time. There's just a couple more questions that I'd like to just get through. So what methods do you recommend to sell this approach to colleagues outside of design and engineering, e.g. marketing or commercial teams?
Wow. That's a question of culture. So what we're really asking about is how do you develop a kind of agile creative culture within organizations? The answer is that's quite a long road. So it can be done. So we've done this with quite a few organizations, from things like ITV to retail banks. What we need to do is, the most important thing is to expose them to creativity and get everybody involved in creativity in a safe way to start with. You need to spin up initiatives and projects and make it visible to everybody, make it clear that everybody's invited. And what you'll find is that the more people you can invite into creative activities, the more people you'll find individuals who just kind of light up a little bit when they get in touch with creativity. I'll give you a good example. So I worked for a major retail bank for quite a while. I was in charge of their design team. And we did a lot of creative culture development. And at some point during this, one of their legal team came to me. He's a lawyer. He's a commercial lawyer. And he came to me and he said, "Hey, Dave, I really enjoyed what you did about the creativity workshop. Do you think that it might be possible to design and write the bank's terms and conditions with the customer needs in mind from the customer point of view?" And I said, "Yeah, I think that'd be a great idea, because the terms and conditions are one of the worst things that the bank puts out. I think that's a fabulous idea." But something in him had just kind of lit up a little bit. But he then became an ambassador for creativity within the bank and was able to go to his team, his legal team, and he went to some of the other teams as well that he dealt with on a daily basis, like commercial team and things like that. And he was spreading little seeds of creative culture around the place. So really, yeah, it's about developing a more creative culture. Some companies do struggle with it, but ultimately I think it's better for everybody.
And then I think last one, unfortunately for time-wise, do you have any considering of the extension of culture beyond the project team, so users, third parties? I'm asking this from a client-side challenge with a stunted culture toward data information.
What do you think, Rich?
So I was kind of thinking about this scenario when you were talking about just your previous question there about how do you extend this culture, and it's about relationship. I think if you think about how to creatively kind of shift your ways of working a little bit, the best way to do that is to get that collaboration, team spirit working from the beginning. And it is going to be more common across these various skill sets. Data was mentioned in the question, but it's not just data. It's also things like platforms. It's about things like ops, which you mentioned before. In one of the organizations I worked in before, it was that working together with journey optimization, who are mostly interested in the data and the analytics around a journey. They don't care what it looks like. They don't care what the user's feeling, as long as they get the outcome that they need from the numbers. And so what we had to do was be their teammates they're not the enemy, even though we had very different opinions at the beginning. But you build those collaboration points where you become excited about the same things.
Yeah, agreed.
Great. So, well, thank you so much, guys. I really enjoyed that session. If anyone's got any other questions, you can send them in. We will be doing a curation of everything following on from today. I will be sending out the recording as well, so if you did miss anything at the start, you will get that in your inbox very soon. I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival. Thanks again, Dave and Rich, for today's session. And
Can I just add one more thing?
Yes,
just before we forget, I'm required by my contract to say that we are actually recruiting. So we have got a number of roles open. So if you check out the BGSS and Spark websites, we are hiring for lots of delivery people. We're hiring for devs, engineers, and so on. And we're also hiring for all sorts of user researchers, strategists, and designers. So if you've been interested in what you've heard today, you think there's something in that, get in touch. You'll find me on the website. You'll find the jobs on the website. Get in touch and let us know what you think.
Well, thank you so much, guys, and I'll see you soon.
Thanks, guys.